Thank you for joining in. And so, before we begin, I would just like to state that this session is not going to be technically or theoretically heavy. And very unlike my predecessors who spoke on this platform, neither do I have the technical depth, nor do I have any experience covering a good length of time or breadth session that I have prepared. I will speak about my journey, trying to carve a path in the development space, the help that I received, the divine guidance all through, the mentorship I obtained, and how Swami, through everything around me, steered the direction of my journey. And also in this process, I hope to bust some myths of the development sector, along with share my learnings. Sorry. Yeah. So we'll start with the first option, which the only option after BCom is a CA and MBA, and the only option after BSc is MSc. So we'll go right back to the time I was in Vrindavan completing my graduation. You enter the third year, and the confusion begins to eat you. Unlike some of my classmates who were pretty focused on what they wanted and where they wanted to be, I was clueless regarding what I wanted to be, either in the short term or in the long term. The understanding that most of us had, that the obvious career options after a BCom were CA and MBA and pretty much nothing else. This belief is more pronounced for the the science students. It is almost as if MSc is the only option after BSc. But I was pretty sure that if there was something else other than a corporate job, I wanted to give that a try. And thus, with that in mind, I began to search. But it was not just downright useless, but it was also very frustrating, because it was like searching for a needle in a haystack without even knowing what a needle looked like. So it was like I didn't want this, but I didn't know what I wanted. So while an MBA or a CA were, the obvious options, I was clear I wanted to explore more. And when we were in Vrindavan, we had that opportunity to access the internet 1 hour every week. So I remember very vividly that I would spend that 1 hour every week trying to search for all possible courses and colleges, racking the websites like Shiksha, College Dunia, College Dekho, again and again and again and again. But so thanks to commercialization and rise of Google behavior tracking, one fine day in the month of August, during my normal search for courses, Young India Fellowship that was being offered by the Ashoka University came on my suggestions list. So it caught my attention with the innovative course content and curriculum. But what appealed to me even more was the enviable teaching lineup. I religiously read newspapers since higher secondary school and devotedly followed some particular writers and authors. And when I looked at the teaching lineup over there, it was a chance to be taught by these people directly. So I began to dig more and research deeper. And Ashoka University by 2018, when I was looking at it, 2017-18, it was not even 10 years old. And the Young India Fellowship, to be briefly put, was an experiment in the higher education landscape in India. Technically, the Young India Fellowship is a postgraduate diploma in liberal arts. Now, I was there sitting in the computer lab, thinking, what did a postgraduate diploma wanted to experiment definitely and go out of my comfort zone. I was very overwhelmed by the uniqueness and unorthodoxy of this course. So uh, the next, what I want to share is, why fellowships serve as an important aspect to enter the development sector, either for, either all of these fellowships offer a very practical exposure to freshers to work on development issues, and they're ably guided by and mentored by very experienced professionals. The development sector is very vast and covers a wide range of specific spheres, which actually become specializations in themselves. So, without wasting too much time, I'll just briefly landscape the development sector for all on two broad fronts. So, one is function wise, and one is development issues wise. So, functions wise, the work that is done by organizations in program design and implementation, like Swadesh and Seva India, is very different from that of impact consultancies like Satwa Dalberg, and funding agencies like BMGF, which is Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Acumen, Michael and Susan Dell Foundation. These differ from CSR aggregators, corporate social responsibility, like Samhita and Give India. The work of research organizations like JPAL and CPPR, which is Center for Public Policy Research, is significantly different from that of monitoring and evaluation organizations like World Bank and Quality Council of India. And the efforts of organizations working on overall policies like Vidhi, PRS, is very different from that of citizen advocacy and awareness like the development issues wise. So organizations working in the education space, in the education space like Teach for India or Gandhi Fellowship, they solve for a different set of challenges when compared to organizations working to better governance systems like PRS India or Janagraha. So broadly, under the aspect of development issues, there are 6 pillars. One is uh, education, which I talked about, Teach for India, Gandhi Fellowship. The next is health and food, which covers malnutrition, mental to menstrual health, everything. So organizations like Swasti Health, Akshay Patra, they come into this. Water and sanitation, organizations like Pani Foundation, Sulabh International, Goonj, all of these organizations work in this space. The fourth is economic development, which is Seva India, Udyam Pradhan. Fifth is governance and government systems, which is like PRS India, Janagraha, GDI Partners, Samagra, and miscellaneous, all others like, we have the Aga Khan Foundation, we have Carpe for waste management, we have Hak Darshak and EasyGov for information systems and citizen awareness and all of those things. So all of those come into one this thing. So almost each of these organizations which I listed above have a fellowship or a young leaders or a young professionals program to enable freshers and other corporates make a transition here. The Teach for India Fellowship concentrates on grassroots work around primary and secondary education. LAMP Fellows, which is legislative assistant to member of parliament. So LAMP Fellows work directly with politicians, MPs, to help them create and focus on essential policy they take care of. The Naropa Fellowship revolves around environmental policy and climate change work. And if you want to work with the government, the Niti Aayog has a young professionals program too. But unlike any of these, the Young India Fellowship is a fellowship that is an educational course in majority. So most of the fellowships which I talked about above require one to work either on the ground or in the offices completely. But the YAF, the Young India Fellowship, was a classroom heavy course. But to its credit, in comparison with other educational courses, though, the Young India Fellowship had almost, 30% practical or internship kind of aspects. So coming back to the fellowship journey, the second myth is that a good candidate implies good marks, and good marks imply a good candidate. So again, beginning with the fellowship, uh, it was a change for me to see that it was not something that worked that way. So as I already said, that the various aspects that defy the normally understood conventions of education, especially in India. So there is no entrance exam. There are subjects that students can choose that are diametrically opposite. Imagine taking a combination of international relations and art appreciation, or political science and Indian cinema. Oh wait, these are not very disjointed in India, especially. But yeah, so the professors have no compulsion to conduct paper and pen exams. And imagine in 1 year you're having 26 subjects across a broad spectrum: psychology, philosophy, art appreciation, cinema, politics, leadership, group dynamics, everything. So, in short, everything from the beginning was far from common. And the advantage with such an entrance and application process is that people without good marks to have a chance to, to be a part of the process, and to to join the institute or the workplace. You can't copy, and no two people can obviously have the same story. So such applications are completely based on how well you tell your story, what failures you've overcome, what challenges you faced, and what solutions you've worked on. So, what has been the most inspiring incident or person in your life? What do you hope to achieve in your life? The answers to these questions in these applications would not obviously expect one to have created world transformation already. But like the child on the beach throwing a tortoise into the sea one by one and making a difference to that one tortoise being thrown, what matters is what are the tortoises you have made a difference to, and how well you're able to communicate that you've made the difference. And how do you plan taking that to take that going forward? And how do you think being a part of this, workplace or the fellowship or this institute could aid you in that process, in that journey? While it's easy for me to talk about it here like this, it was a real struggle and a nightmare actually for me to look at that process, look at those questions, the essays, and it was very new. It was something I hadn't expected. I thought I would prepare for 2 months for an entrance exam, and boom, it's today. I would still struggle to do it if asked to do it again. But that's the beauty of such applications. There's no perfection in that. These applications and these questions make you contemplate to understand what was great. They make you look back at your life as if you were examining it under a knife. I had to write an entrance exam even for my first see something like this for masters. It was hard, but it wasn't impossible. Looking back, I can only comment that it was well worth the effort. And why did I feel, that such an application process was very important? And why am I emphasizing is because it was not only very, not only a revelation for me, but also it carried a lot of learning for me later on. So I think that this process like this takes the concept of don't judge a book by its cover very seriously, and gives an opportunity to everyone to tell their story. A few months back, I was conducting some interviews for recruiting people in the state of Uttar Pradesh, and we had received a lot of applications. This was in the mid of COVID, and a lot of job losses had happened. So more people were very willing to be a part of any job that came their way. So they were all shortlisted, and after a first round of interviews, I was interviewing the candidates. When I received the list of candidates and their CVs and their candidatures, and after having gone through them, there were two applicants who I felt were not suitable. So one of them had done their UG over 7 years and failing 5 times. However much I tried to reason with myself, I couldn't get myself to endorse his candidature. So I thought, but I was asked to give one chance and speak with him. I came out wiser from the interview I conducted. His was an inspiring tale, fraught with obstacles and problems and uh, absolute determination, how he overcame them. So many colleges and workplaces have understood the importance of such aspects and are incorporating interviews into their assessment modules. In USA, Europe, Canada, Germany, some of the most highly ranked universities in the world work through the applications, conducting at least 2 to 3 rounds. The applications consist of lengthy essays to help these university officials understand some facets of your life. So it was the same way with the fellowship too. While I thought it was the only one, while I thought that Ashoka University was the only one that was doing such a process, much later I come to know that it's being followed by a lot of universities and a lot of workplaces too. So the application, so you first submit the essays, and then it's followed up with a telephonic interview and an in-person interview, with each one turning more personal and inward and more contemplative. The next, I'll go to the Young India Fellowship and the course and the structure and my learnings from there. So I don't know how I got in, and I'd be lying if I tell that this worked for me. This is the uh, you know the interview didn't go well. The essays, like I said, cringeworthy, and I undermined the importance of the interview. And I went wearing a white shirt and jeans. Others who attended with me were, in full blazers and formal wear and all of that. But Swami had his way all through. So I landed there after having done my research about the course in college and the subjects, but it was way, way beyond my expectations. Every professor who taught over there had authored at least 10 books, three of which were Gitas and Bibles in their respective domains. Like textbooks, they were. Some of them, like professors, like, we were taught leadership by Professor Dwight, art by Professor Chaube, group dynamics by Professor Kenwin, history by Professor Rudrangshu Mukherjee, politics by Professor Giles, international relations by Professor Rudra Chaudhary and Shiv Kumar. And one of the most transformational courses for me, development economics by Professor Mihir Shah. A lot of these names you all might have heard, some here, some there, but when we dig into the contributions made by each of these people, apart from this, these courses, these 26 courses, there's also a maddening emphasis on writing, reading, and research, which led the management and the educational team to formulate a year-long critical writing course. And obviously, there is the other important aspect, the experiential learning module, where you work with an organization over 7 months during the weekends. Every week, 2 days, you spend your time with these organizations, and also there are designated 10-day periods which come 2 times in the year, where you work for those entire 10 days with the organization you're working with. So again, much later into the fellowship, I realized that most of these organizations that participated in this ELM, experiential learning module, were either social enterprises or not-for-profits working on development projects. I worked with the CFE, Center for Entrepreneurship, Ashoka University, and it was a very enriching experience for me. I got to meet a lot of people in the industry, and most of the organizations that the Center for Entrepreneurship supported in various ways were somehow social enterprises or not for profits that were started by the students, Ashoka University students. Even the incubator and the accelerator program that they run in partnership with Microsoft, IIM Ahmedabad, and ISB Hyderabad. Even this accelerator and incubator focuses on issues related to urban planning. So I got a chance to interact with some of the most influential voices in the development sector, because it was Delhi, because it was in the heart of you know uh, everything that was happening, and the founders were themselves entrepreneurs, new age entrepreneurs themselves. So they were trying to reach to more and more people and get them on board. When something new starts, probably they call the initial enthusiasm, initial josh. So they have tried to bring in a lot of people into the university. So I got an opportunity to interact, meet one on one, and be mentored by Anshu sir, Goonj founder, Sonam Wangchuk sir, Secmol founder. Popularly, he is the inspiration behind Amir Khan's role in Three Idiots, and Shahid ma'am, of course, Teach for India founder. So I also worked on a research paper to understand the backgrounds and motivations of social entrepreneurs through a mix of qualitative and quantitative tools. And it was very fascinating for me to see how the circumstances during their childhood could have such a transformative impact. I also worked with the AIM Smart City Accelerator, which is a part of the Center for Entrepreneurship, where the 9 incubated companies were on the campus, and I got to interact with these founders and social entrepreneurs one on one. I sat with them trying to prepare presentations, sat with their founders when they were brainstorming, and sat through some of their classes and courses. They got in very influential entrepreneurs, nearby founder. Um, uh, and a lot more others who came in and spoke to them, guided them. They also did. They also had the pitching session, so they would, like a Shark Tank that happens. If you all would have seen Shark Tank, so on the final day of the incubation, they, a group of investors are invited and they do the pitching, and if they like it, if they're convinced by the pitch, they invest also. So I was a part of all of these and helped them make their presentations and all of that. Very fascinating to interact with such people with such passion. So these organizations, even though they were being incubated, so they were still small. So they were trying to change one person at a time, and their passion was to take it to a national level and to take it to an international level. And I think it was during that whole process that I understood that my personality and my thought process were inclined towards the development sector. So my deep interactions with these social entrepreneurs and the quality time I spent with them led me to actually thinking about my startup. So this is the picture of the Center for Entrepreneurship. If you can see over here, this is very beautifully and artistically done. It's a very nice atmosphere and environment they have over there. So this is a picture of Professor Mohammed Yunus. If you can see over here, very faintly, it's there. It's his signature. This is Sonam Wangchuk, SecMol founder. So, Professor Yunus is a Nobel laureate in economics and founder of Grameen Bank. Sonam Wangchuk sir is, the SecMol founder, and the last is Jacqueline Novogratz. So she is the founder of Acumen. Acumen is one of the world's largest funding not-for-profit organizations, and they do phenomenal work with design change and um, behavioral change, and working on design for not-for-profits. Uh, yeah. The next is that the next myth is that one can solve the issues and challenges in the development sector by sitting elsewhere. So from the interactions. with countless entrepreneurs I was able to speak with, I understood one thing, that if you want to solve a problem, you've got to be where the problem is. So I shortlisted 3 areas where I wanted to work in, where I wanted to be, and finally I decided on one. I actually wanted to start my own social enterprise in the space of agriculture. My placements weren't also exactly working too. Probably I was doing it very half-heartedly, and I couldn't understand why at that time, because I still hadn't had the clarity that development sector was what I was looking at. So there were just one or two that I gave very excitedly, something like the Nudge Foundation and Swaniti. Again, check these two out. Very interesting work they're doing. And both of these also weren't positive. I neither had the experience nor did I have a good pedigree. I came from, Satyasai College Institute, which hardly anybody had heard of. So obviously, these were not going in my favor. So I come from a very sleepy little town in Andhra Pradesh called Vizanagaram. So I decided to get back home and work with farmers. I had decided agriculture, so I decided to get back home and work with farmers in and around my town. The critical aspect with the development sector, or any sector for that matter, is that without ground zero experience and without a knowledge of the intricacies of the ground circumstances, one cannot become adept in trying to solve those challenges. So I got back home and took some time to identify how and agriculture challenges through doing research online. But that is not how it works. If you want to solve the challenges, you've got to be on the ground, I realized. So 2 weeks into my search at home, I found two FPOs, farmer producer organizations, who were working with more than 5,000 farmers and were open to having me work with them. And they were also pretty excited with some of the ideas I had proposed to work on. I began to work, we were making some good progress. It was a group of wheat farmers actually, and I proposed that we could expand into value addition, something like flour and grinding and all of that. So if we could accumulate some funds internally, we would be eligible for a government grant, which would cover almost 75 to 80%, hopefully. And the rest 20%, any bank would be willing to give a loan. Once you have secured government grant, more than willing to give you that loan. So what I felt the reason is that this would enable the farmers to have a greater price realization, because these value added products, not much effort is being done, but they give a lot of margin to these farmers directly. Until then, the FPO, the farmer producer organization, was being used only for uh, collective purchase of raw materials and collective sale of agri produce. So I suggested that any purchase like that of manure, pesticides, probably even sourcing of labor, water, whatever, any purchase that needed to be done could be done through the FPO, which would mean lesser costs because of collective purchase. The easy part was now done. I gave my ideas. I said that is how it will work, and I did some Excel calculations. That was the easy part. The hard work was in convincing every member of that FPO to be a part of this. So because they had to contribute, right? So I began to speak with farmers and mobilize them. We were doing good. We were, it was hard, but progress was being made one day at a time. I received a call from a random number one day. The voice was really calm. And it said, don't mess things around. This FPO was created many years ago itself. Why do you think it isn't active? Mind your own business. You live in so and so place in Vizanagaram, right? Don't continue further. And the line dropped dead. Different from actual life. I was shaken. I didn't return to that place after that, and I stopped answering the calls from the farmers there. Uh, Probably I would convey my apologies to them sometime when the time comes. But yeah, it was almost 45 days by then. And I was already applying to various places and attending job interviews and all of that. Coincidentally, at that time, just a day after receiving that call, and with all of that confusion in my mind and you know everything that was going on in my head, two job offers had materialized at that time itself. The process was going on from a month before itself. So one was with IPAC, Indian Political Action Committee. It's a political consulting firm, and the other one was the Internet Sathi initiative, which was by Google and Tata Trusts. And both of them are doing extraordinary work, and I chose the offer from Internet Sathi initiative. By the way, if none of you have heard of what political consulting and what do they do and how does it happen and what do organizations like IPAC and Mindshare Analytics, there are so many out there currently now. What do these organizations do? Check them out. Very interesting and very fast-paced work they do. And it's every election they work with different parties and they work with on the ground to assess the ground pulse and create election manifestos and campaigns that way. So let me give you all an moving on to the Internet Sathi initiative. Let me give you all an idea about what the initiative was all about. So have you all heard of the domino effect? So the domino effect is it's like a chain reaction. That is the cumulative effect that is produced when one event sets off a chain of reactions or a chain of similar events. So the person in this picture, if you can see the picture, the person cannot push the last wall, the last big wall in front of him. But he has the power and he has the capacity to topple the smallest brick in front of him, which can push down the next, which is bigger.
Shanmugh, sorry to interrupt. We are on myths 3 slide. We are not seeing the picture that you referred to. Yeah, good.
Yeah. Sorry, thank you. So yeah, so if you can see over here, the biggest wall that is there, the person does not have the capacity to topple that last wall, but he has the power to the first brick that is there in front of him, the small one, he has the power to push it. That one can push the next brick, which is a little bigger than it, which will topple the next one, which is bigger than that, and ultimately topple the last one. To make it to put it a little more dramatically and make it more relatable, how many of you remember? So there's this Tamil movie called Ramana by Vijaykanth. Don't worry, if there are no Tamil people here or there are others here, this movie has been remade in countless number of languages. So in Telugu, it started with Telugu. Telugu, it's Tagore. In Kannada, it is Vishnu Sena. In Bengali, it is Tiger. And Hindi, it is Gabbar is back. So now I hope you all are getting what I'm talking about. So in this movie, the protagonist would help a person and ask that person to help three more. And in turn, ask each of those three more to help three more and do likewise. And this would go on, and ultimately everyone would have helped everyone, right? But it starts with that one person. So that is the domino effect. The Internet Sathi initiative is designed on very similar lines. Women in rural India had very limited access to smartphones and internet and scored extremely low on digital literacy. What if we could change that for those 300 million women in the country over there? But how could we possibly reach all these 300 million women who were in the farthest and the remotest places of the nation? So this structure was this: a core team would train coordinators up to the district level, who would in turn conduct trainings for these specially selected women called Internet Sathis within various blocks in the district. The responsibility of each of these Internet Sathis would be to take the learnings from that digital literacy or from that training that they got to 900 more women over a period of 10 months. Using, they were given the syllabus, they were given the apparatus that was required, and they were also given a plan, a route map. Everything was there with them at their disposal. So this was an initiative of Google and Tata Trusts. Each of them shared resources for this and were invested almost equally in this. It started very small with one district, and the model developed from there. I could talk about the whole model and its evolution, the reasons, the challenges we faced, the failures we overcame, and how everything evolved over time. But that would go on for that could be a session for another day. But the benefits from this initiative, what we realized that the domino effect wasn't related to just digital literacy being spread. That digital literacy was spread, and it also opened up a Pandora's box of opportunities for these women. They discovered a world of opportunities for themselves. So some of these women learned, some of them taught, some saw videos, others created videos, some shared information, others created information, some participated in surveys, others were a part of our data collection survey programs, some sought answers, others sought questions, some part of all of this and observing all of this firsthand up so close. I was reminded of this one quote which I heard when I was studying. Educate a man, you educate an individual. Educate a woman, you educate the family. What I saw there was very similar. Many women who got access to the world of internet over there didn't just explore it selfishly, they took the entire household along. But again, we should not generalize it to everyone. There was some who utilized the benefits of this and spread it. There were some who just didn't give us the necessary or put in the necessary efforts. There were some who went beyond what was expected of them and did wonders. I'll come to some stories later. So after harping about some of what exactly we did, uh, the team I was a part of. So that gets me to the myth 4. People working in the development sector slog on the field all day. So we were a team of almost 50 members working fully on this initiative, doing various functions. I was a part of the operations team, which comprised the maximum number of this 50, as appointed as the state project officer. And as I had talked about the various functions above, the first function which I had talked about, something like program design, implementation, monitoring, evaluation, funding agencies, research. Those functions, what was our job over there was monitoring and evaluation. So we had access to the funds that were committed by Google and Tata Trusts. We designed the program, but we did not execute it. We were doing it as a short burst program. It was a program of about 12 months at the maximum. So we needed to be quick and we needed to be able to move about fast, very quickly. So imagine having to do a hiring process for every district in every state we entered and giving them jobs for just a year. It would be a nightmare and logistical so we would identify smaller organizations on the ground. This was the model we took because of these challenges. We identified smaller organizations on the ground, organizations that had a history of working with the people over there, organizations that were similar to what we were doing, organizations that were ready to partner with us, and more importantly, organizations that were ready to commit the necessary resources, especially the human resources for the contract period. The groundwork would be done by them, and it was an advantage that way. These people knew the district well because they were from that place, they were entrenched in that state or that district. They knew in and out of the district, they knew the officials over there, the district administration over there. So we didn't have any headache. We didn't have that headache to liaison with government officials at the district level. So these the groundwork would be done by them. They knew the district well, the people there, the routes, the roads, the geography, the topography, the challenges and problems. And it saved us a lot of time and effort, but it also came with a lot of challenges, which I'll talk about later. Our job, like I said, was to design the program, fit it into timelines, share it with the district teams, conduct trainings whenever necessary, and ensure everything rolled out as per plan. So we monitored the rollout and implementation and evaluated if we were on the right track, and if the impact was as intended. While for quite a good deal of time I was required to be on the field, uh, a majority of our time was spent in the city. In Karnataka, we were working with Swasti, so I would spend a good deal of time working at their office. And in Uttar Pradesh, we partnered with FIA, partnering Hope into Action. So I would be at their office, and a lot of my time I would also spend my time at the Delhi office, because our team is there. And this was the view from the office. It is not like a lot of people. So there are two kinds of myths: people who know about the development sector and are working in the corporate. Some of my friends think that they paint it as a very rosy picture, very romantically. They think that, oh my god, he is in the green field out there and breathing fresh air, and there is no pollution, and that is the life that anybody should lead. The other end is that people who do not know about the development sector think that, oh my god, he's in the field, he is digging wells, he is in the whatever, he's constructing toilets, or he's going door to door doing some awareness campaigns or donating food or something like that. But development sector is so much more different from that. So our office was in the cyber city. Delhi people would know what that would mean. It's a corporate hub. So, and this is the view from the office. This is the 15 laner highway that is there, and very beautiful office again. So, what I'm saying is that those myths, those stereotypes that are there of working in the development sector are not all true everywhere. The next, I will talk about my learnings from the Internet Sathi program. So I joined the initiative only in its penultimate year. So Google and Tata Trusts had committed to fund and invest in this initiative for a period of 5 years at the beginning, targeting to reach across at least 20 states. And 5 years into it, we had reached more than 20 states, and still there was a lot of scope that was left. They agreed to continue for, I think, just a couple of years more, I think 2 years more. And that was when I joined in fully knowing that this initiative would just probably end in a year or two, but the thrill of being a part of a change at such a scale was too hard for me to ignore. And being a part of this was a revelation for me. So one of the first learnings which I understood, which I came across as a part of this Internet Sathi program, was regarding the beneficiaries on the ground. Um, yeah. So regarding the beneficiaries on the ground. So I think a lot of times, you know, we hear stereotypes of how people in the villages are, and how hard they can be to convince, or to get a point across or something. Being from a rural background myself, and but owing to my schooling and college experience from cities, we even the schooling was in a very restricted environment. So we didn't really see rural India, except for those that 10 days of gram seva that we were a part of. And apart from that, we really didn't see much over there. Internal, which got internalized in me. So about how simple these people are, how they cannot understand complicated concepts, things like entrepreneurship, and how rigid they are in their thinking, and how they will not move, and all of those things. So other thing which I was also taught was that, these people, owing to their very limited uh, exposure to the outside world, cannot dream big, cannot imagine a lot. But in my experience at the on the ground as a part of the Internet Sati initiative, I have met some of the most smartest, most hardworking, and absolutely clever women on the ground who made me question this stereotype really hard. They grasped complicated concepts like, business concepts also, like break even, fixed costs, variable costs, etc., very quickly, and had terrific management skills. And the extent to which some of them went was also, when, as a part of this Internet Sati initiative, the extent to which some of them went was also really, really heartwarming. But again, that's the stereotype. We can't take the stereotype and, generalize it across everyone and the entire population over there. So we have faced numerous issues and challenges with some really enterprising crooks who made this, who rode and took advantage of these stereotypes too. But on a whole, there were really many positive experiences for me personally, and I am tempted to share one such, very impactful experience which I came across. So a little background into this: in India, the issue of caste runs very deep in the society. All of you know that the lower caste people cannot freely mingle with the rest of the society, and so harshly and so rigidly this is followed that villages are also segregated into two parts: the normal village and the Tanda village, which is specifically for lower caste people. For a long period of time, I thought this was a phenomena only in South India, but they are almost everywhere. In Uttar Pradesh, there are these Dalit settlements. In Maharashtra, where I'm working now, there are Adivasis live in Adivasi habitations are in separate settlements called wadis. So there's a Bhavshet, then there's a Bhavshet wadi, and uh, and this is everywhere across the country. And these tandas or wadis are places with, abysmal facilities and no access to basic requirements, no electricity, and do not have these people do not have any knowledge of their rights, and are often discriminated against and taken undue advantage of. One of the Internet Sathis whom we had worked with in the district of Chikbalapur near Bangalore in Karnataka was from this upper caste village. And during one of our routine field checks, I asked, randomly, I pointed out to this Internet Sati and I said, as a surprise check, I said, we should go and see how the training happens. What is the state of her village? Do they know about the program, and what has been the change till now? So when I went to the village, to the Tanda in the village where she was taking the classes, I was very surprised. I had observed her traveling from her village to the Tanda and taking the, interacting with the, women in the Tanda, and, trying to solve for their challenges. So I asked her the reason, like, why are you moving from your village to this Tanda? You would have obviously encountered a lot of friction from your family and from your fellow villagers. And she told me that she had been working in the Tanda for at least a couple of years by then. Very young lady. She had completed her UG. By that time she had just completed 5 years after her UG. She had just been married, so she could be at the receiving end of a lot of, discrimination. Her family, she could be under pressure from her, new husband, and her husband's doing great work. And she said that, against the wishes of her family, she had a supportive husband, very luckily, and against the wishes of her family and the village, she's working with this Tanda people to help them understand their rights and all that they ought to have, and ought to receive from the government, and all that they have lost as a as a consequence of being discriminated by the upper caste people. The inhabitants of the Tanda, when I spoke to them, were profuse in their outpouring of love to this woman who was working to change their lives one at a time. And this was not something we asked of her. She went out of her way to make a greater change. She said that, I felt that more people would be ready to listen to me, and I thought I could have a greater change when I work this way. It was hard, especially at the starting. People looked at her with a lot of suspicion, the Tanda people, saying she's coming from the the upper caste place. uh, what intentions does she have in her mind? It took a lot of convincing for her to begin her work, actually, but it has been a phenomenal work she has done. And when I was leaving, I took a picture of them, and um, this is one of my favorite pictures. I not because I clicked it, but because it reminds me of the commitment and the passion with which these people were working. And moreover, it also reminds me of the grit and determination. Each of those women in that picture spoke to me, about for providing a better life for their children and their family. It was very moving for me to listen to them and understand their stories of oppression, discrimination, and how by February 2020, just 1 or 2 months before the lockdown, COVID and all, we had reached most of our targets, and we were preparing to phase out the entire program from all of our geographies. We had planned a massive impact analysis to assess the change, the transformation induced by virtue of this project. But midway, we couldn't because of the COVID, and midway during the COVID, the final handover was underway to Google and Tata Trusts, and I moved to Swadesh Foundation. So before I talk about Swadesh Foundation, I'll just take you all through uh, two approaches to solving ground issues in the Indian development sector. And this is again, it is not a theory, a formal theory, but this is what I have observed and understood from the ground, and from the work I have done. So uh, the work that Swadesh Foundation carries out is actually pretty interesting. In the Indian development sector, uh, it is one of a kind. So I'll just take you all through the two models of rural development that is followed in India. The first one is the most common, and it happens this way. There's a problem statement that is chosen, and all the efforts are focused towards solving the problems in that particular problem statement. For example, let's take the Internet Sati initiative itself. The target audience was very defined. So it was digital literacy, it was for women, and it was only in rural India. We didn't work with urban people, and we didn't work with men at all and children at all. We worked only with women in rural India, and it was very specific to digital literacy, our work. So we uh, you know the target beneficiaries were very defined, but the geography wasn't. We scaled to almost all states of India. And once we completed the program in a geography, we moved to the next one. But the second one is the other way around. And it's hard to come across organizations, especially large not for profits, do it this way. You start from a small geography and work on holistic development. All massive, but the change that happens is deeper and more sustainable. And Swadesh works this way. The holistic development is made possible by its focus on four pillars. The first one is water and sanitation. All are When we enter a new geography, all our work starts with water and sanitation, because if people do not have access to drinking water, we can't convince them to do anything else. And they are also they are fighting for their life, and we can't expect them to look at comforts, something like that. So we start with water and sanitation, move to education, health, and then economic development. So when I began to work here, the ground challenges and issues were vastly different from those I dealt with and encountered as a part of the Internet Sathi program. Being a grassroots organization, no, this the programs of Swadesh Foundation are very different, and Swadesh Foundation itself implements its programs on its own. Um, to flesh out the difference in the work and what resources might be needed and how it differs, I just give us very small comparison, very small. Um, the team I was a part of for managing the Internet Sathi program, we were 50 people together. The entire program we managed across all the states, and we partnered with smaller organizations, but we ensured that the program reached to almost all the states in the country. Swadesh has a full-time employee count of more than 300, and it works in just 2 to 3 districts of Maharashtra. I think this should give you all an idea of how grassroots work differs from other kinds of work, and how resource intensive this is, and why it is very hard for uh, in this manner at scale. Under the economic development vertical of Swadesh Foundation, we've been working with farmers and processors to strengthen the agri supply chain. Uh, so right from before the farmer purchases the produce, right from there we start till it the final product, the edible product, reaches the hands of the consumer, and everything in between is what we are trying to intervene in and make change for the better. So they have set up an entity, a separate sister entity called Konkan Agri, to look into this initiative, which they have named as Real Konkan. I have been I've given the responsibility to lead this initiative end to end. So we are currently, very recently we have started. So we're currently working only on one particular product, the cashews, because it is very specific to the region. A lot of people, there's a special Konkan variety of cashews, and a lot of people. What we are trying to do is, in short, we're trying to disrupt the $20 million cashew industry in India on two fronts. One is the marketing and sales, end by our direct to consumer model, and the second is on the manufacturing end, where we have a decentralized production process. I think to the relief of many, I've reached my end over here, but in a couple of sentences now. So if someone were to ask me, so Shanmuka, what have you learned all these years? I just have one reply. So the circles of knowledge concept. So the circles of knowledge concept was a very interesting concept that I had come across when in our final year of Brindavan during an awareness class. And I really think it is apt for my summary and for this question anytime I'm asked. So the first circle, the smallest, let's start there. So there is knowledge that I know, which is represented in circle 1. Then there are things that I know that I don't know, which is represented in circle 2. And lastly, there are things that I don't know and I don't even know that I don't know them. The scale of the circles is off actually. I hardly know anything. The what I know, the small o, is how much I probably know. So to make it less confusing, I'll give an example that will summarize this concept and also summarize my, all that I've said. So when I was in Brindavan, again, you can, like Steve Jobs said, you can connect things looking back. So looking back, when I was in Brindavan, I knew. So I knew that the possible career options after BCom were CA and MBA. So I knew that. And I also knew that there was something apart from CA and MBA, which was there, but I didn't know what exactly it was. So I knew that I didn't know that. And at that point in time in Vrindavan, I hadn't had the faintest idea of all, of the development sector concepts and, aspects that I had elucidated above in this talk. So not only did I not know anything about the development sector then, but I also did not know that I didn't know it. Without confusing you all too much, I'll just leave this for your thoughts. And with this, I would like to end it here and thank all of you for staying on so patiently and listening to me and being with me all along. Thank you so much, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, Shanmukh. I think it was an extremely enriching. It is nice that you covered all the points that you wanted to convey, and through that you also weaved your own story from Brindavan to where you are today at Swadesh Foundation. So Shanmukh is actually part of the CEO's office at Swadesh Foundation. It's a big responsibility, and he's also recruiting and making his team bigger. I think he has more work to be executed, and he's being entrusted with good responsibilities. We have allowed for